Okay, so this is part 3 of the review, and I'm hoping to tie it up here. And I just want to go briefly over the concept of functions here again, but I want to start off with the date function again, and the fact that PHP starts off with the Unix date format, which is also called an epoch, or if you wish, an epoch. It basically is the number of seconds from January 1st, 1970. And so everything within PHP is primarily based around that. So, as I said, functions. Printf is a function. It's a predefined piece of code that does something very specific, and you can call it printf. Perfect example. Why should you have to keep writing the same piece of code over and over again? So it's already provided for you within PHP. And time handling utilities, with some exceptions, is also there. I have written my own time routines because of the way PHP handles input and output of time, but I won't go into that right now. That's a more advanced topic. So we have a variable here called time, $time, or string time if you wish, equals time. So time, the function time, will grab the current time, day, date in the Unix epoch and store it in the variable time. If we go down here, you'll see the first one, printf Unix timestamp, simply prints out that epoch in its standard 10-character format. Here's another PHP function called date. In this case, what it's doing is taking that epoch and turning it into something more readable. So let's take a look at what this does. And here you can see, here's our Unix epoch. If I were to hit the refresh, you'd see that that and the seconds below it continue to advance. Every time I click it, the epoch changes, as does time in standard format. Now, the one thing you'll see about this is that when it says for current time is 1:31:34, this is what we used to call Greenwich Mean Time, or what they now call Coordinated Universal Time. So we're not making up for the difference between here and Greenwich, England, basically. And here are the other examples of our code, the first one being 2019, January 22. If you look at that up here, what we see is date Y. There's a capital Y is the full year, numeric format. Date F, the full printed month, i.e. January, and the day. The next line, if you look at this, is now everything in numeric format. So lowercase y gives us simply 19 for 2019, M gives us the numeric month, and D gives us the numeric day. And then again on this line, date, the function date, we are asking it to return the full year, the full month, and the day of the week. The capital D gives us the actual weekday, and lowercase d giving us the number. We will write our own function a little bit later, but right now I want to cover getting data from a form. A lot of pages have forms on them, and if we look at what I'm referring to, our own web page, you'll see that we have a form here right in the middle. It's just links to a search to return data from our website. If we look at this one here, here's our standard top of the web page. There's nothing remarkable there. It's doc type HTML5. It's HTML. The head, which has the title. In this case, it says to do supply a title. That's what if you create a default web page under NetBeans, that's what it gives you. So we could say get form data here. And in this case, we see a new meta tag that you wouldn't be familiar with, UTF-8, which is the character encoding. The computer interprets this as what character set to use. There are various others like Cyrillic, Mandarin, Japanese, etc. And this is another new one, Viewport, which basically is telling the web page should size to whatever device you're using it on. So this is basically says if it's a phone, scale it to the phone screen. If not, well, scale it to the device's screen. So now we're into the body. We have a div tag. In this case, we're not doing anything special with it. And we have a form tag. And the form tag is what is going to tell the web browser to process this data, or tell our web server, web browser to process it. So in this case, it's post. There are others. There is get, which is also another common one. And then action. What script is going to do something with what we're feeding it? You have to have something to process your input. We're going to display the word first name, and it says input. Now we're going to tell the web browser what we want to display. In this case, it's text. And now let's just run the script here to see what it looks like. Come on, come back up. So if we run that, if we look, so that text file is going to give us this line here. Let's go back here. We throw in a break, a couple of breaks so that there'll be a space in between and that this will be on a new line in the web browser. And we have another text field called last name. It says text and last name. And then we have a radio button. It's these two little dots here. It's odd that they call them buttons, but rather than buttons, but it's not a checkbox, so they call it a button, whatever. And you'll notice that when I manipulate these, if I click on one, the other unchecks and the top one checks. If I click the bottom one, the top one unchecks and the bottom one checks. If you look here at our input, we have type radio button, and the name for both is student. Normally you can't get away with that for something in a form. If you do that, it's going to confuse issues and you're going to have funky output from your script that you use to process it. But in this case, because it's a radio button and it's submitting for the same item, are you a student? Yes or no. So in this case, we have the first one, student equals yes, default selected, and the value equals 1. And no is not selected, but the value equals 0 for no. And then down here, the input type is submit, which gives us this button here. Value equals submit, so that when you put the value there, that's what it puts on the button. I could simply change submit to enter. And now you see that it says enter on our button. So again, this is straight HTML. This is not PHP, not yet. But let's run this again. Let's do something with it. I'm going to put my name here. And no, I'm not a student. So if I click enter, it feeds back my information. It says the first name is Ken, the last name is Plumley, and am I a student? No. So if you look up here where it says action, it says unit4_3.php. I have that up here, so let's have a look at it. Take input from a standard web form and display it in another page. That's my comment. So it's, again, I put in comments to say what I'm doing. I have a variable here called first name. Now you'll see something called HTML special cars $_post first name. Now if you remember from the index, the first name is called first name. And that's what this does. The post retrieves the value of first name and puts it into this variable called first name. HTML special chars is a bit of security for stripping some special characters out of the text line, as that's one method for hacking websites, is to put a whole string of oddball characters onto the line, and sometimes the web browser will submit it and the web server will act in strange ways. So if you put this in your script, it is one step in the process of protecting your web page. It's not going to completely protect your web page. There's other things that you could do to protect a web page from hacking, which are a little bit beyond this series, these classes, but this is a step in the right direction. Again, we have another variable. This one is called last name, and $_post. It's retrieving something from a web page being submitted. In this case, it's last name. $student is retrieving whether or not we're a student. So this first portion of scripting here is outputting the top of the page, telling the web browser and the web server that it's an HTML page, and giving a title there. And then we're into the body. And this is a table that we're generating so that everything is neatly organized. And now we're printing the value of first name. We're not really doing any processing of it. So first name comes in, it's referenced here, it's printed. Last name is also referenced, it's printed. And now down here, a little bit of logic. This is an if statement. I'll go over that. We're comparing data. So what we're saying is, if the value of student is 1, then student equals yes. Else, if it's not 1, then it must equal no. And then down here, am I a student? Simply print either yes or no, and then we close the page off. So this is what's called a comparison, and what we're doing is we're comparing the content here of a variable to another value. You can compare variables to variables, and there's all kinds of options for that. When you see two equal signs next to each other like that, it means, is it 1? Whereas below that we see one equal sign, which means this equals that. In other words, put the value yes in the variable student. These are sometimes referred to as if-then statements. If this is true, then do that. Else, if it's not, do this. Now, let's go back to functions. As I said, printf is a function, the time is a function, date is a function. There are many functions provided for you within PHP, but you can write your own. And that's what we've done here. If you look up under our standard opening delimiter, you'll see the word function, and then a name. In this case, we're calling it calculate data, and inside we have $value1, comma $value2 in the bracket, and then the curly cued bracket, which indicates a block of code. It opens here, it closes here. So this entire section is our function in its entirety. And what this function does is you feed it two variables, in this case numbers, then whatever number is in these. Value 3, in this case we're dividing value 1 by the content of value 2. And then here's a new one for you. It's called return. And return, in this case, takes the value 3 and gives it back to whatever called it. And this, when you run a function, you're do a printf, you're calling the function. So when this function is called, it divides these two numbers and then it gives or returns the response, the value, the answer back to whatever called it. So in this case now, if we go down to the main body of the code, this will not execute until it's called. It's up here sitting and twiddling its thumbs. Value 1 is 100, value 2 is 25. So we call this code by saying $value3 equals calculate data, and then we put value 1 and value 2 here, so they will be sent to the function. So value 1 is 100, value 2 is 25, so what this is saying is divide 100 by 25 and send back 4 to be printed. So let's see if it runs. And it does. Let's change our calling routine here now to multiply the two values. And we have 2500, which is as it should be. Put the divisor back. Now let's just do something funky here and change that. But we're going to have to change this as well. Remember our rule about formatted printing. So we're going to have to change that to a float. And 3.968254. So that is basically how you write a function. Now, eventually we're going to get into a little bit of object-oriented programming, which changes how we do this somewhat. But I've stretched on a bit for now. So I think I've closed it off to what we covered to the end of November. So I'm going to end this video here.